All right, so we're on the website. We've gone to what do we do, the educators and community groups. Scroll down, and this time it's the truth about turnout. Same thing, training video and a view module. And again, you'll see that there are a couple of, like there are some state modifications, and then you'll see a folder that says excuses for not voting. This is a game, and the directions are there, and these are the cards that you would print out. On one side of each card, there is an excuse that was given by people in the 2016 election. I think it was 18 to 24-year-olds in the 2016 election for not voting. And then on the reverse side is one very good response to that. Not the only response, but a good one. So each one of the students is going to get one of these cards when we play the game. And I'll explain that when we get to it. But the module itself, again, has a slideshow and a script. And as Robin said, this is what the script looks like. So you have a picture of the slide that shows on the screen, and then you have the actual words that you can say. When you present in person, it's color coded. So anything that's in blue is what you would use if you were working in person. When you get to this slide, anything is in red is if you are doing it remotely. But here is the slideshow. And a caveat, the 2024 election results, when we created this, we used US Census data to for most of the slides that you would be using, most of the things that kids will be using. The US Census has not yet released their data for most of the things that we are including on the slides. So at the present time, these are only updated through the 2020 election. There are a couple of things that are good, but I'll tell you that as we go along. But it is more important, I feel, to be sure that we use consistent data that we know is absolutely reliable, rather than try to get some other data and put it in now and then have to change it later. All right. So the truth about turnout is a good follow-up to the timeline of suffrage, because one of the things we know about Gen Z and millennials is that they don't think their vote counts. And that part of the reason they don't think it counts is that they don't think there are enough of them to make a difference. And this is a slide that is a slideshow that's intended to show them that they do have power if they use it in power of numbers. If they haven't participated in the suffrage timeline, I use this slide to just kind of give them a really quick overview of how long it has taken to get the right to vote. But then this is where we really start. So right now on a piece of paper, what I'd like you to do is to write down the percentage that you think voted in the actual in the 2024 election. And these are the actual figures in this one. Okay, and then if you would just tell me what you put down. Barbara Chait, what did you put down?
60%.
Was that 50 or 60? I couldn't hear.
I think it might be 50, but I put down 60.
Okay, whichever, it's
Oh,
okay.
it's 60. Yeah.
Robin, how about you?
I said 59.
Jill?
I said 49.
Barbara McCosker?
I said 60.
Joan?
I said 30.
Okay, and I know that I'm missing some other people here. So would you, there we go. Amy?
57%.
Okay. Who else am I missing? I know there are 9 of us, so we're missing 2 other people. No? Okay. All right, so I'm going to show you, we're going to try to figure out who is the closest. Okay, 63.7. Who was close?
I think Barbara, if she really said 60.
I did. I really did.
I'm happy to be wrong.
There's a part of me though that feels like it, you know, that it had to be different.
Okay, now when I do this in person in a classroom, what I will do is I'll have the kids write this down on a piece of paper. I have little sticky notes that I carry with me all the time. So if they don't have paper or pencil, I've got it. So they've got to write it down because then they've committed it to paper. And then I start by saying, all right, how many people said that it was 75% or higher? And you may get a couple. How many people said it was 40% or lower? And you may get a couple of people who say, okay, you folks need to sit down. So now you've got that middle group left. And then you narrow it down like, who's 70, whatever I said, 70%, 60 to 70, who's 40 to 50. And then you finally get down to somebody who's the 63. And then I've got some kind of prizes. And I usually give it to several kids who are the closest to that just to make it fun. So that's a good way to get them up and active and interactive right in the beginning. Okay. So we've talked about how important it is to vote, to have your voice heard. So let's look at who's voting and whose voice is being heard. So this is the activity then, and then it says, right, if I'm standing in a classroom again, I say, okay, that is about 1/3 and 2/3. So I use my hands and I visually divide the class and say, all right, you 1/3, you didn't vote at all. So all of you, the 63.7%, are making all of the decisions. And those decisions affect that 1/3 too. It wasn't always that way. In 2016, think about that. Only 55% of the vote of people in the country voted. And elections matter. Elections matter because there are issues that we care about. Immigration is one. The environment is one. These are all things that kids before you have said. Guns are one. Do you care about gun rights or do you care about gun control? Taxes are one. Do you think they should be raised? Do you think people who are rich should get a bigger break, or do you think people who are poor should get a bigger break? War. Do you think we should go to war or don't go to war? Healthcare, education, and there are plenty of other issues. Elections matter. The people who are elected make the decisions on those issues. And the people that they're going to pay attention to are the people who voted them into office and who will vote for them again or not vote for them again. So in New Jersey, who can vote? And again, this would be changed, but we've gone through this before. Okay. Now, what we're going to do today is to look at a series of graphs, and we're going to make some interpretations of those graphs. And in order to do that, I want to make sure that you really understand some of the tricks that people can play when you read a graph. So I need to stop sharing for a second again because I forgot to click that little button. Now I can do it. All right. So please pay attention and think about this as we're going through some of the rest of the graphs that we have. There we go.
A toothpaste brand claims their product will destroy more plaque than any product ever made. A politician tells you their plan will create the most jobs. We're so used to hearing these kinds of exaggerations in advertising and politics that we might not even bat an eye. But what about when the claim is accompanied by a graph? After all, a graph isn't an opinion. It represents cold, hard numbers, and who can argue with those? Yet, as it turns out, there are plenty of ways graphs can mislead and outright manipulate. Here are some things to look out for. In this 1992 ad, Chevy claimed to make the most reliable trucks in America using this graph. Not only does it show that 98% of all Chevy trucks sold in the last 10 years are still on the road, but it looks like they're twice as dependable as Toyota trucks. That is, until you take a closer look at the numbers on the left and see that the figure for Toyota is about 96.5%. The scale only goes between 95 and 100%. If it went from 0 to 100, it would look like this. This is one of the most common ways graphs misrepresent data, by distorting the scale. Zooming in on a small portion of the y-axis exaggerates a barely detectable difference between the things being compared. And it's especially misleading with bar graphs, since we assume the difference in the size of the bars is proportional to the values. But the scale can also be distorted along the x-axis, usually in line graphs showing something changing over time. This chart showing the rise in American unemployment from 2008 to 2010 manipulates the x-axis in two ways. First of all, the scale is inconsistent, compressing the 15th-month span after March 2009 to look shorter than the preceding 6 months. Using more consistent data points gives a different picture, with job losses tapering off by the end of 2009. And if you wonder why they were increasing in the first place, the timeline starts immediately after the U.S.'s biggest financial collapse since the Great Depression. These techniques are known as cherry picking. A time range can be carefully chosen to exclude the impact of a major event right outside it. And picking specific data points can hide important changes in between. Even when there's nothing wrong with the graph itself, leaving out relevant data can give a misleading impression. This chart of how many people watch the Super Bowl each year makes it look like the event's popularity is exploding. But it's not accounting for population growth. The ratings have actually held steady because while the number of football fans has increased, their share of overall viewership has not. Finally, a graph can't tell you much if you don't know the full significance of what's being presented. Both of the following graphs use the same ocean temperature data from the National Centers for Environmental Information. So why do they seem to give opposite impressions? The first graph plots the average annual ocean temperature from 1880 to 2016, making the change look insignificant. But in fact, a rise of even half a degree Celsius can cause massive ecological disruption. This is why the second graph, which shows the average temperature variation each year, is far more significant. When they're used well, graphs can help us intuitively grasp complex data. But as visual software has enabled more usage of graphs throughout all media, it's also made them easier to use in a careless or dishonest way. So the next time you see a graph, don't be swayed by the lines and curves. Look at the labels, the numbers, the scale, and the context, and ask what story the picture is trying to tell.
Okay, and then at this point, we take a look at some graphs so that we, as the presenter, can be sure that the kids are understanding that. So in this graph, take a look at the x-axis or at the y-axis. You can see that it uses one of the things that was talked about in that video. This one starts at 30% and goes up to 65%. How would the graph look different if it went from 0 to 100? And then we wait for kids to give the answers. And I'm going to go through this because I know we're short on time and I want to make sure that you get to the part where you use the graphs. And then we ask kids to tell us one thing they can know for sure by looking at this. And they'll come up with some things and we have them posted on a whiteboard. One thing they can know for sure is that in 1964, it looks like about 48% of the population turned out in a midterm election, and that was pretty high. But one thing they can also know for sure is that there's a big difference between turnout in a presidential election and turnout in a midterm election. So we get some things they can know for sure, and then we say, all right, let's see if you can make some assumptions. Like there are variations in that graph. What do you think might have been going on here when there was, a big change? What do you think might have been going on here? And we look across the bottom, and what do you know? This is 1916, 1922. Guess what was going on in here? Women were getting the right to vote. All right, so what kind of assumption might you make? And we guide them through a couple of things so that they know the difference between something they can say with certainty by looking at the graph, like this is 62% in 1916 or 63%, and something that they would be making some judgments about. This is another one that we can use to do the same kind of thing. So you can pick and choose which graph you want to use. And getting the new data for, well, this was not so new, but 2022, this really stuck out to me because we had been teaching kids about trend lines. And we didn't have the 2022 data when only a quarter of the population turned out to vote. And it turns out that that's really an anomaly. So the thing they can know for sure is that it was 35.5% of the population of 18 to 24-year-olds that turned out, but that was unusual. And what was going on at that period of time is a judgment that they can make. So the idea is to get them to understand the difference between things that are quite certain by looking at the graph and things that they are making assumptions about, because they're going to use that. And then we go on. So who has the power of the vote? Well, we're going to go through a series of graphs, and you're going to look. This is the 0 to 100% is at the left, and this is covering years from 2000 up to 2024. And this is the one piece of data that I could get from Circle, which is a reliable source. And I've only included it, and I would only say it by saying that that is not the same data that has been used in the rest of the chart. But we were trying to show that there was a decline in voter population among 18 to 24-year-olds. All right, so this is 18 to 24-year-olds. This line shows the voter turnout for presidential elections by 25 to 44-year-olds. This shows it from 45 to 64-year-olds. And this shows from 65-year-old to 74-year-olds. All right, so looking at those, what I'd like you to do is on a piece of paper, jot down for yourself one thing you can know for sure by looking at this graph, and then one assumption that you might make. Okay, we're going to go on to another set. This was race and ethnicity. These graphs, again, are from 2000 to 2020, and the graph here goes from 0 to 100%. The blue line represents the turnout of white voters in presidentials. The red line shows the turnout of Black voters. There's something really interesting about this graph, too, that I'll tell you about afterwards. The gray line represents Hispanic voters.
That's it, okay.
And the yellow line represents Asian voters. Again, write down one thing you can know for sure by looking at these, and one assumption you might make. Okay, and this is by level of education. Now, this graph, when I made these, I didn't realize that they're a pain in the butt to try to make, but they will be changed because this graph is wrong. So this is only 30 to 100%, but the others that overlay this will go from 0 to 100. So you will see where that blue line actually lies. But this is less than high school. And now you can see how that changed the appearance of the line. Now this adds high school graduates who turned out. This line adds those who have some college up through having a college degree, a bachelor's degree. Okay, and then online, what we would normally do would be to put people into breakout rooms, but in a classroom, we break them into groups of 3 or 4. And we ask them to share with one another what they've written down as their know for sure and what they've written down as their assumptions. And one of the things that when I mentioned that slide that had racial differences, that slide was changed about 3 years ago to represent the number of years that kids would have likely been alive during presidential elections. And prior to that, it had been 100 years. When we narrowed it down to just the last, well, from 2000 on, it looked as if the Black and the white vote just kind of switched places back and forth, back and forth. And if you had looked at it with 100 years, it was only a blip of 2008 and 2012 when that change. So that's one of the things that you might get as an assumption that would come across. But at any rate, I know I'm rushing and I'm sorry about that, but you have the kids talk with one another. We usually give them about 3 minutes to do this because everybody has a chance to share. And then we say to them, all right, as a group, come up with one statement that tells what the basic premise is that all of you agree to, that based on those slides. And then you have a spokesman tell them. And what they come up with is essentially, so who's making the decision right now? Turns out that historically, if you're old, if you're white, and if you're well educated, it's more likely that you will vote, and therefore you have the power today. So if you don't vote, no power. So voter turnout turns out to be a really big deal. And if you want politicians to make the decisions that you want them to make, because your world is going to be very different from my world as an old person, you have to get involved. You have to begin to elect people who reflect your values. Is there change ahead? This part of the presentation is also updated. This information itself came from Circle, and it was about it was from 2022. And it was saying that in this past election, the one that just happened, there would be 41 million new Gen Z voters who would be eligible to vote. 8 million of those would be new since 2022. And nearly half of those would be people of color. The popular vote count in 2024, so this most recent election, the popular vote for Kamala Harris was 75,017,626. The popular vote for Donald Trump was 77,301,997. That's a difference of 2,284,371 votes. So 2.3 million roughly. Look at the number of Gen Z voters who were eligible to vote in 2024. 41 million. The last election was won by just over 2 million votes. Do you have power? You bet you do. This shows, and this is one of the other ones that you can hide or not hide, but this shows the percentage of voters who will be the majority. So in 2020, 18 to 20, the Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X, and then the millennials. So up through about the age of 18 to 40. Though in 2020, that was 41.5% of the population. In this one, 48.5% of the population. And in the next presidential election, that age group will be the majority. And 2/3 of those people will be people of color. If they turn out to vote, that's who's going to be making the decisions. You, and we say this to the kids, so you are the ones who are most likely to influence others your age to vote. And how can you do that? Well, we need you to help people register to vote. We need you to help them make a plan. We need to have you remind them of election day. And we need to have you use psychology on them. Use psychology? What, me? All right. So here are some things that you can do. And what we know is based on human behavior. The first thing you want to try to do is to make it seem like the norm because people want to fit in. You can say something like, we're all going to the polls together, then going out for pizza. Come on with us. Why does it work? Because human beings are motivated to do what others around them do. And we know that voters who hit the polls were 8.1% more likely than a control group that didn't get asked or didn't have people encourage them to participate. The second thing you can do is to have, say call them names, but you want them to think about being something, not just doing something. So we ask them to call a person a voter instead of asking them if they're going to vote. Why does it work? Because deep in our brain, there's a difference between voting and being a voter. Voting is a one-time action. Being a voter is a part of your identity. It implies that you're an upstanding citizen, politically conscious, socially active, and or patriotic. And when people perceive those as valuable things and they want to be thought of as any of those things, they'll react more and do more if you call them a voter and not just ask them to vote. What can you do? You can watch your language and you can say, you're a voter, aren't you? Another thing you can do is address their commitment issues. Help them to make a plan. Why does it work? Well, I don't know about you, but I always say in New Year's Day, I'm going to exercise more, but I fail to follow through, or I'm going to budget better, but I fail to follow through. Well, this happens to people on election day too. They'll say they'll vote, but then they'll forget, or they won't find the time. We're more likely to translate goals into actions if we make a concrete plan. So what can you do? You can help them do that. You can say, are you going to vote in person or vote by mail? Or do you have your vote by mail ballot? Or what time are you going to the polls and how are you getting there? And then the fourth thing is promise you'll follow up, because nobody likes to let a friend down. Say something like, I'll text you on election day, or send me a picture of you voting for the first time. And then that's much more likely to make them follow up. So why don't some people vote? And this is where that game with the excuses comes in. Each one of the kids in person is given one of those cards with the question on one side, or the excuse on one side rather, and then the good response on the other side. And we ask them to memorize the response to their question. And they're going to be asked to read their question to somebody else. So we give them a minute to really think about it. And then we pick somebody at random. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a minute so I can talk to you. So we pick somebody at random to read their card first. So I've got a card here that says, I have a disability and I can't make it up the steps to the polling place. All right, so I'm telling this. Now I ask all the kids in the class, okay, I pick you, and they pinpoint somebody and they say, give me a good answer to that. So I have a disability and I can't make it up the steps to the polling place. Amy, how would you answer that?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Anybody want to help her out?
I'd say get a vote by mail ballot.
Okay, that's a good one. Jill, Joan?
Uh, I would think that, well, maybe this is a little too complicated, but my thought is that most polling places will have ramp access if that's what the issue is.
Okay, there is actually law that requires them to do that.
Mhm.
So when my question was answered by a couple of kids in the class, I would say whatever I would need to fill in to what you do. Yes, voting by mail is one option, but there's also law that requires the polling place to be accessible to you. And then you can fill in with other things too. I mean, that just happens to be what's on my card. Then, Amy, since I put you on the spot, you would get a card and you would have the answer on the other side that you would have mentioned. So your excuse is, I just plain forgot it was election day, so I didn't vote. So you can put somebody else on the spot. How would they answer that?
Oh, you mean I have to choose somebody?
Yeah, you can put somebody on.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Jill.
Oh, well, the problem is if the election's over, there's not much you can do about it. But you need to mark it on your calendar or set an alarm on your phone or something like that. Or again, vote by mail.
Okay.
Get it done and over. Or early voting. Early
Oh,
voting.
see,
Now
all of
available.
this is coming up like it percolates up.
Yeah.
Yes, and if in a classroom, it might not be Jill that comes up with all of those things. It would be Jill and then somebody else and somebody else. And then Jill, you would get the next question. And what you see in a classroom is lots of giggles, and they will, pick on their friends and really put them on the spot, and everybody's laughing about it. So what you can use that game to take up as much time or as little time as you want at the end of the class period. But what happens is that every kid walks out with at least one answer to one question or one excuse that people might give. I give a set of those to the teacher when I'm done, because as a teacher, those of you who are know, there are times at the end of a class when you've got 2 minutes left and you don't want to start on the next part of the lesson. Having one of those cards, you can pull it out and say, okay, here's an excuse, and let's have a discussion about it and see what we can come up with as the answer. And I've had teachers use those, so that's good.
Did we see the whole thing, basically?
Pretty much, you just didn't, what you didn't see was people working in groups, people taking the time to, come up with a statement and those kinds of things. And then
Oh,
you
okay.
see the game in actual operation where you could have 10 people do this,
Okay.
or-
Okay.
so the slides, there are many, many slides in this one. If I go back and show you the film strip part of it, but there are probably 50 slides in this one, but that's because those graphs build. So you've got like 5 or 6 slides for each of the categories. You don't have to worry because you see it and it looks huge. It actually goes pretty quickly. You don't want to belabor those slides. You want to see people see it build, 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 and then think. So,
I have a
Can
question
I
about
ask a
the
question?
graph slides.
yeah.
So they show the percentage of that category that votes. So 75% of people between 65 and 74 vote
Of the eligible voters.
of the eligible voters vote. But that says how many of them vote. It doesn't really say how large that population
Exactly.
is.
Exactly.
So, right, so don't you have to kind of like explain that? Because that was a lot of discussion. This election is, yeah, 100% of this group votes, but it's like such a tiny little group.
Right. It's all us old people that are dying off.
Right. I just want to make sure I understood what the graph
Yes.
was versus not exactly what somebody might think it is.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that sometimes comes up when they're discussing the assumptions that they can make. Because
Gotcha.
they say, that looks like it's, right across the board and it's high all the time. But you're talking about a much smaller part of the
Right. Okay.
population than you are when you're thinking of 18 to 24-year-olds, for example.
Mhm.
So,
So that's what I thought it was trying to say, but it's easy to assume because you have a higher percent of a certain group voting that that's a bigger number of people voting.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Good. Somebody else had a question. I heard 2 voices at the same time.
This is Candy.
Hi, Candy.
I was wondering if the one graph that jumped out at me was when the black vote went over the white vote, and it just said to me, we need more candidates like Obama. That's what rang out to me. Did you get that in any of the high school feedback, like that they picked up on that
They
was a
did. They did, particularly where there were large groups of kids of color. They say, oh, those are the 2 years that Obama was running. And that's
Okay.
why I said to you that when we had that graph and it was 100 years, the graph, it was like black and white vote like this right across. And then there was 2008 and 2012, and it went like this, and the black vote exceeded the white vote. But you don't see that when you look at 2000 to 2020. It's really interesting how it can skew your perception of history.
You
So,
can as the from being from corporate America, they'd have an expression, you can prove anything you want with metric.
yes, yes. And that's why I think it's really important for kids to have the experience of using these graphs and learning that graphs can be misleading, and that you have to be really careful when you're interpreting the information that comes from it. And if they walk out just remembering that, I will be very happy. If they walk out remembering that and saying, hey, if I vote, if I can get my friends to vote, we're really going to have the power. That's even better. But, we'll see what happens. At this point in time in New Jersey, my goal this year is to get people out to vote in the governor's election, in the primary, as well as in the general election, because it's going to be a really interesting year here.
Oh, yeah.
But at any rate, all right. So it is 9 o'clock. My clock just rang, so I will let you go unless there are more questions. I'm willing to hang on for a bit.